Why is it that a lot of dads are getting depressed? And why are we not talking about it? And why we should be talking about it. That's what we're going to cover in this video. So I think as dads, we feel like it's our responsibility to be the strong one in the family, that we've got to hold it all together for everyone else's benefit. So what happens is we have our own struggles and we start to feel burnout, anxiety, or maybe even depression. First of all, what's getting us down? Why do we feel anxiety? Why do we feel burnout or depressed? So I think one thing is the identity change that we go through when we become a dad. You know, we've previously only had ourselves to worry about, and as long as we can look after ourselves, then we're okay. And then the next thing is you have children that are completely dependent on you, and you've got to provide for them, you've got to care for them. Nothing prepares you for, becoming a parent. All of a sudden, it's just this added kind of layer of pressure, for you to deal with, and it's something that you have to adapt to. And obviously, that can leave us feeling kind of overwhelmed. Other reasons that we start to feel maybe slightly depressed or slightly anxious is because of that identity shift. You've gone from being who you were before to a parent, and all of a sudden you've got a lot less time for other things that you had in your life previously that gave you that identity. Perhaps you played a lot of sports or you had hobbies, and all of a sudden, you're in this cycle of working to provide for your family and then caring for your family, looking after your kids, looking after your house, keeping it safe, creating that safe environment for your children. And there's little to no time left to do other things that made you who you were. You might start to feel disconnected from your partner. Your partner only had you in their life in terms of being priority, and then you have children, and then the children are their priority. The children demand and crave your partner's attention, and you're bumped down the priority list. The connection you maybe had with your partner once before would certainly change, but it might leave you feeling like you're disconnected and isolated. We might feel financial pressures. We look at it as kind of a man's responsibility to provide for their family. It's that kind of hunter-gatherer mentality that we have. Things can become difficult. There's the added pressure of knowing that you might lose your job, and previously, if the threat of losing your job was that you personally would maybe suffer for that, but when you've got a family to provide for, the pressure of that becomes even more heightened. And perhaps you're a single income family. Perhaps your partner has taken the time off work on a long-term basis to look after your children. Childcare costs are so expensive. Sometimes it's just not practical financially for your partner to continue working. So all of a sudden you're the sole provider. You've maybe had two incomes as a couple, and now you've got one income and you've got additional mouths to feed. Your livelihoods all depend on you. You are the sole provider. So, you take on this role as being provider, and we've gone through a cost of living crisis in the last 5 years, and everything's gotten more expensive. Food, mortgages have gone up, interest rates have gone up, energy's gone up in price, and probably at a higher rate of inflation than what salaries have gone up. So you might be earning the same or slightly more, but the cost of essentials has become even higher. And the problem with that is then that your standard of living decreases. That coupled with the fact that you now only maybe have one salary And all of that weight to provide falls on you, but you maybe feel like you're not providing enough. So if your livelihood's been impacted by cost of living, you may be thinking, well, I'm not providing as much as I would like to provide for my family. Maybe it's not being able to afford to take them to nice places or go on nice holidays, or perhaps you're on a really tight budget for the essentials for your kids, and you start to feel like a bit of a failure, even if your partner doesn't see it that way, even if they understand that times are hard, understand that sacrifices have been made in order to become a single income family. We put that pressure on ourselves, and the kind of, you maybe feel like a failure. You maybe feel like you're not providing enough. And if you feel like you're failing, you feel like you're letting down your family. So you get racked with guilt. You get racked with shame. So you maybe start to feel low, and maybe you want to talk about it, but you don't want to talk about it to your partner. And that's pretty common. And I've felt that way as well. And it's partly because, for me, I know that my partner's got a lot on. She's got the stress of being so busy looking after 2 young kids. And I don't want to pass any of the weight that I'm carrying onto her, because she's carrying weight herself. And there's a part of it that's just kind of, she's too closely connected to the circumstances. So that maybe leaves friends but even then, maybe you don't have the same connection with your friends as you once had, and that adds to the loneliness. Maybe your friends that you spent a lot of time with before having a family, you don't see as much of now, because they're busy people as well. They've got jobs, they've got families, so you don't see them as much. And again, it's that feeling like a burden. Do they really want me offloading to them? Because for all I know, they could be having the same problems. So do they want to be hearing about mine? So it leaves us feeling a little bit isolated. We don't feel like we can talk to the people closest to us. And sometimes, confiding in another friend, it's kind of this male pride thing, where you don't want to kind of seem weak. There's maybe a bit of embarrassment, because you maybe think that on the surface, maybe your friends are thriving. Maybe they're doing really well. You saw that post on Instagram where they'd been on a nice family holiday to Disneyland, and you think, oh, they're living the life, like they've got no problems, and you don't want to kind of concede that you fall short of what they're doing. So there's that like almost embarrassment factor, even though probably deep down that you could confide in those friends without any judgment. You're judging yourself on their behalf almost. So you just kind of think, well, I'm just not going to talk about it. So the reality is that we suffer in silence. We just say nothing, and the weight that we feel just compounds over time. And the worrying thing is, you might not even realize it's depression that's kicking in. You just feel a bit low, and it maybe isn't constant. It's maybe not every day. Some days maybe it feels lighter, other days it feels heavy. So you just kind of brush it off. You just think, oh, it's just a bad day. I'm just going to sweep it under the rug. I'll be feeling better tomorrow. And as I said, you could have good and bad days, but what you'll find by just keeping it to yourself, by not confiding in someone and not trying to get help, is that those bad days are compounded. They get heavier and heavier and heavier the longer time passes, the longer that you're keeping it to yourself. So it could manifest itself in terms of exhaustion or being irritable. I've found that some mornings I wake up and I feel exhausted before I've even started the day because I've got things weighing on my mind. Or you can be irritable, most likely to your family because they're living with you day by day. And instead of being present and being in the moment, which is so important when you've got young kids, being present and being actively involved is something, if you can't do that, you're going to look back and regret it. But instead, maybe your mind's elsewhere and you've got kids rightly demanding your attention, wanting that engagement, and, you can get irritable. And I've been there, and it's that just then racks up guilt because you know that how you're feeling isn't anyone's fault and you're maybe taking it out on them. And that's the worst part. And if not being irritable, it could just be you feel completely withdrawn. Like you just don't want to be around people. You just want to be left alone. And again, that's not a great place to be at any time. But during these precious years of having a young family, you want to be present. You want to be involved. You don't want to be distant. You don't want your kids to get the impression that you're distant. Because you don't, the bond that you've built suffers, or it holds you back from making that bond. So if you've watched this far, I'll bet a lot of what I've described resonates with you as well. So what do we do? It's easier said than done, but you have to get it out your system. You have to talk to someone. And that's what I've come to realise just in the last few days. I would just shrug it off. I would just say, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I've got problems, but, it's not every day. And I'll just accept the bad days and just, tomorrow will hopefully be better. And whilst I do have good and bad days, the bad days do compound. The weight that I'm carrying just gets heavier and heavier, and it gets more exhausting because I just feel the weight of it constantly. So, recently I have opened up to my wife a bit more, and whilst that has been good, I still feel I can't fully open up. And I don't like saying that because, we should be able to open up to our partners, right? So, but I guess, in some ways I just still feel like if I open up too much, even if it's not intended, it might come across wrong, or I don't want her to feel like she's responsible, because she's not. But I just worry that she might take it that way and it makes her feel bad. So I decided I have to speak to somebody who's a little bit more disconnected from my situation. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts with men talking about mental health, and was surprised to see that it's quite common, that they just feel like they can't get it all out in the open to their spouse, which made me feel a bit better because I thought, is there something wrong, that I can't do that? Is it, but I think it is normal. So what's the next option? So I've reached out to a friend who doesn't know I want to have a chat. I meet up with him occasionally, a few times a year. He's kind of local to me, but he's got his own family and everything, so we don't meet up as often as we used to. And I actually have met up with him the last few times thinking I need to speak to him and just open up, and for whatever reason in the last couple of times I haven't done it. And then I walk away from it feeling awful because the opportunity was there and I didn't take it. So this time I'm determined to talk to him about it, because I just feel like airing it all will lift a bit of the weight, because at least then I'm not alone in it. Someone at least is aware of how I'm feeling, and just being heard, I think, will make a huge difference. Even if they haven't got the answers to all the problems, they might be able to offer advice, but even just listening and hearing me out will really help, I think. So I've arranged to meet up with him in a couple of weeks' time. It always takes so much time to plan these things these days when you've got so many commitments with your family. But I know he'll support me. And I know that because I know that I would support him if it was roles reversed. I would talk about it. I would listen to what he had to say without judgment, because I think that's part of the problem is this kind of people you care about, your friends and your family. You want their respect. You want them to think highly of you, and if you've got things going on in your life, and whether it's your own doing, whether it's things out of your control, it doesn't matter. The point is that they if they're truly your friends, and they truly care about you, then they're not going to judge you. They will understand. They'll understand that we can get down and times can get hard and things like that. So I think that's what's held me back previously from having this discussion with him, is that just that I know it's stupid. Of course he's not going to judge me. He's going to understand, and I'm going to feel better for doing it. But anytime he's asked me how I'm getting on, I always say I'm fine. It's that classic 2 words, isn't it? I'm fine. We see it so often in mental health awareness ads and things, and we just make out like everything's cool. But why do we do that? It makes no sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that discussion, and then I'm going to make a follow-up video where I'll talk about how that went. How it went compared to how I thought it was going to go, because I want to show people, like, if you're watching this now still and you're going through anything, doesn't matter what it is, but if it's got you feeling low and you've been suffering with it for a long time, I want to prove through the next video, because I'm convinced that if I just take the courage to actually talk about it to my friend, that I'm going to feel better for it. It might not make the problems go away, but I'll feel better. And I want you to subscribe to this channel so that you can see the output of that. And hopefully that video will show that actually I feel lighter, that that there has been a bit of weight lifted just through sharing it. Because how many times do we see things about men not opening up, and that weight getting heavier and heavier, and sometimes people tragically don't see ways out, and they take their own lives. And I don't feel like I'm at that point by any stretch. Like, I don't want this to be confused with like a cry for help as such. I'm not worried about myself in that way, but I feel the weight I'm carrying getting heavier. And I think I realised that by not talking about it, it doesn't just suddenly disappear. So I just want to take action into my own hands before ever potentially getting to a point where I didn't see a way out. Because you could be watching this and be in a similar position, perhaps worse. Perhaps you really are struggling. And I want you to hang around and watch the follow-up video. I'm not sure when it will be, probably into the beginning of December, I reckon, but I want you to watch that video and see that by talking about it, it can help. Because I truly think that, you know, talking about your problems with someone who you trust will make a huge difference, and it could be the difference between you being here and not. And that's really what this channel, I guess, is going to be about, is trying to encourage people to not suffer alone. And, you know, this is a safe space, right? If you have, you know, if you have any worries at the moment, you don't have to share them with me. If you want to, you can, and I'll get back to you. I'll respond. Like, you know, some people might feel they've got no one to turn to, and that's not a great spot to be either. You know, I know I've got friends I can speak to. There's only a couple that I would probably feel confident enough to speak to, but it's at least somebody. Some of you might not feel you've got that, but yeah, I think if you do feel like you've got no one to turn to, feel free to reach out. But if you have got someone and you feel like you just can't quite pluck up the courage to have the chat, then hopefully this next video will show that actually, if you just take the plunge, you'll feel a lot better for it. That's the hope. Anyway, listen, I've spoken for way too long. Until the next video, look, take care of yourself. Go easy on yourself. You're doing your best. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.